Welcome back, everyone, to Authentic as Fuck podcast. My name is San. So, recently we've had more guests in the podcast. So, I want to do a quick intro about like what this podcast is about and what we're trying to do. So, I have a community called Night Owl Nation where we practice storytelling, and the way we define a story is the moment when a false belief clashes with reality. So in other words, you can call that like myth truth, like when something most people believe turns out to be false, or some sort of an inner transformation where like the old me used to believe this and then now the new me used now believe this. So there are moments in our lives where rug is pulled from underneath us, like we thought everything was okay and then boom, like, and small examples could be like traumatic. It can be an experience that's a story of trauma, or it could be a story of healing. And it depends on like whether, if it's a story of trauma, that means something that you used to believe in was exposed. And if it's like a story of healing, something you used to believe in becomes debunked. And these stories can also be like small to large in size, right? Like, for example, the stories can be small, like, not believing in Santa to believing in Santa, or it could also be like some sort of a big event, right? Where I thought I could trust this person, but then I got betrayed. And that could be a story too. So I think these larger stories have a bigger impact in our lives, and kind of some of these bigger stories in our lives define who we are. It also defines like why we do what we do and how we do it. So what I'm trying to do in this podcast is invite guests over, entrepreneurs, creators, thought leaders, and kind of ask them about their story and some of the major stories that happen in their life that made a big impact in their life, that defines who they are, kind of, that changed the way they think or something like that. So today we have Baron Baptiste from Baptiste Institute. Welcome, Baron.
Good to be here with you, son. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So Baron, Baron's actually had like a personal impact in my life because I've started practicing yoga because of Baptiste yoga. And do you want to kind of quickly introduce, like, brief introduction of yourself in your own words?
Yeah, my name is Baron Baptiste, and I have, I grew up in San Francisco, California. I have 3 grown sons, all really good guys. And I basically grew up in a family that was very much into yoga practice, Eastern philosophy, and living a healthy life, physical culture, health food, before it was popular. My parents were kind of way ahead of their time. They were, I think, revolutionaries in the world of physical culture, health, and mind, body, spirit kind of philosophy and way of living as a way of elevating quality of life. So I grew up in an environment that was kind of looking, how can I as a human being be the best version of myself, live the highest quality of life, and a well-rounded life. And it kind of all started there for me. And I spent a lot of years kind of searching and seeking myself, really. And then eventually, some things happened and my mind opened up into, what's most important to me. I think I at a certain point in my early 20s, I started establishing some values, personal values to live from and live by that kind of altered my path in life too. Yeah.
So what would
Yeah.
you say do you want to go a little bit into those moments? Like, so what were some moments in your life where something you used to believe turned out to be false? It's like you changed your beliefs on it, it like radically
Yeah.
shifted your life, your course of your life.
Yeah. So, again, I was raised in an environment where there was a lot of different types of like spiritual teachings and spiritual teachers and gurus. And my parents would like take myself and my sisters, my siblings, to India. We would go and stay at different ashrams and visit with different gurus. And then my parents would also host at their studios in San Francisco. They would host different like Indian teachers and gurus, and probably leaning toward more of the Indian type teachers and gurus of yoga, spiritual teachings, meditation. Um, and so I grew up with that. And I really followed that trajectory into my early 20s, where, I was kind of jumping from guru to guru and, seeking God and seeking a spiritual life. And through that more kind of Eastern approach. And then somewhere along the way in my early 20s, I moved to Los Angeles and I found a Jewish Christian minister, mystic teacher. And he also taught meditation. And it rocked my world, really. I hadn't really had access to like Christianity. I always had kind of a judgment toward Christianity and religion just growing up. And mostly I would see those like preachers on TV, the Jimmy Swaggarts and the Tammy, whatever, has Baker and her husband, and, those kind of mega church teachers. And I didn't relate to any of that. So when I was introduced to, I found this teacher as speaking like common sense and biblical principles, but not like from a religious standpoint. More of like, well, Jesus was a teacher and this is how he lived his life. And it was like Jesus, the man and the messenger. And it spoke to me right away because I was a very lost person at that point in my early 20s. Like I didn't really have a foundation, so to speak. I was kind of searching and felt like a
Were you
leaf in the
teaching
wind
yoga
in a
at
lot of
this point?
ways. At this point, no, I wasn't yet teaching yoga.
Okay.
I was working. So my parents also had a restaurant in San Francisco, like a health food restaurant. And I grew up working in the restaurant and in the health food store and in the restaurant, I started as a dishwasher and grew up, through like being a busboy and then waiting tables. And then I became a cook and then kind of worked through all areas of the restaurant. So I learned the restaurant business. I really knew it inside and out. Eventually I took over the restaurant and ran the restaurant. In my early 20s. And then I was like, hey, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So I jumped ship, moved to LA, and I got work. Like I just worked in different restaurants because that was what I knew. And then I got into some personal training kind of by default. A roommate of mine in LA worked at a gym as a personal trainer in Beverly Hills. He's like, hey, I could get you a job. And I go, well, I know about physical culture and training, and because that was part of my background with my family. And so, no, at this point, I was not teaching yoga yet.
Got it.
I was going to school, I was going to college, and kind of seeking like, what is my jam here in life? Like, what's my, I didn't have a purpose. So I found this teacher, and it kind of changed everything for me. I started meditating, and the way he was teaching was just different. It was more of a biblical based kind of meditation practice, like Old Testament, like Jewish mysticism kind of meditation, where it's more observation. You watch and observe your emotions, you observe your thoughts. You then start to realize through meditation practice, I started to realize, well, I have thoughts, I'm not my thoughts. And I started to kind of wake up in a lot of ways. And then it became more of a transformational experience for me. I started just like realizing some really practical ways of living, and again, values that I really didn't have prior to that. Mm-hmm.
What is so before that I'm assuming you were already practicing meditation. Like
Yeah. So I grew up practicing meditation, again, more Eastern, yoga type meditations where you visualize your chakras and you visualize,
Okay.
energy moving up your spine, and you're kind of generating these experiences in meditation, which, is very different than the way I started meditating, which was just to watch, to be an observer and to
Got it.
become more objective and to watch my thoughts and notice when I'm getting caught up in my thoughts or just living. I went from living life in my head to living life more present, and realizing, well, my thoughts lie to me all day long.
Yeah.
I started having
I thought that the
realizations like
Eastern
that.
yoga or the Eastern meditation also does that. No, I mean, I don't
Not
know.
so much.
Yeah.
No, not
Oh,
so much.
really?
I think the Buddhists do.
Okay.
They more practice. Well, again, it depends which discipline or which approach, but I think a lot of the Buddhist type of meditations are more like Vipassana, where they
Mm,
they are more observation based as well.
yeah.
Different
Also, it was different
intention.
back then,
Yeah.
right? Like, I guess back
Yeah.
then nobody really practiced meditation the
No,
same.
meditation was not
Yeah.
a thing
Yeah.
culturally or in society or how yoga. I mean, meditation now is so popular and
Yeah.
everyone is, meditating, and social media influencers are all talking meditation, and yeah, and
Do
everybody,
you think
and
there
their
are some
grandma are
downsides?
meditating now. Hmm?
Do you think there are some downsides to like these yoga meditation being kind of commercialized or popularized? Like, because like more people are doing it, but
Yeah.
is that necessarily good if they're not doing it
Yeah.
correctly?
Yeah, yeah. Well, for me, going both routes, I think the problem I have with the yoga meditations is they don't necessarily wake you up. Now, you may awaken to some in experiences like in yourself and energy and things like that, but they're not necessarily related to reality, like the physical
Mm,
universe, the floor beneath you, the ceiling above you, the walls around you, the people around you. It's more of like you go in and then you're kind of generating certain kinds of imaginary experiences, I want to say. And sometimes they're real in people, what they feel. But they're in energy, things like that. And I'm sure, look, it's a healthier alternative to drinking, smoking, drugging, self medicating, watching Netflix, or, it's a healthier alternative to just shut the world out and get, quiet at any level. I think there's benefit to that. I think for me, like spiritually, it kind of took me down a rabbit hole because I was looking for something. I was looking for a spiritual life and like a connection to God, so to speak, but I wasn't finding it. I was
mm,
kind of lost. I was like in the world and like a bottle being tossed around. I didn't have any footing. I was like standing on groundlessness all the time. When I started doing the other kind of meditation, suddenly I started getting my feet on the earth, started,
got
getting
it.
present and waking up to my
So
life.
can we talk
Yeah.
about kind of what followed that? Like after that, in that kind of period where you started practicing these type of meditation.
Yeah.
What happens in the months, years following? Like how did it
Yeah.
change you?
So, yeah, I was also a couple of things. I was going to school. So I was working in radio, and I was like an engineer, producer in some of the radio networks in LA. And
Oh,
LA
yeah.
is like the biggest radio, like epicenter for
Was
radio,
that
talk
because you
radio in the
wanted to
world.
get in radio, or you happened
Yeah.
to stumble upon a radio job and then you got interested?
Yeah, I was studying journalism, and in school, in college, and I was like, I want to be a journalism. And then I loved radio for whatever reason. I was like, radio is like a cool platform to speak to people. So I started getting these internships at some of the bigger radio networks in LA,
Mhm.
and so I was doing that. And then on my free time, I was working in restaurants, and then I was also and doing some private training, and then I was also um, I was going to yoga classes in LA, and there wasn't much yoga back then. There, like, now there's like a yoga studio on every corner of a city like LA. But back then there wasn't much. There was like one studio on the west side out by Santa Monica. I don't even think there was a studio in the Beverly Hills, Hollywood area. Actually, Bikram had a studio in Beverly Hills. I would go there sometimes, but it wasn't a popular thing. You'd have like, 10 or 15 people in a class. It wasn't popular yet. But because yoga was in my background, and I started realizing also in my 20s, like I started appreciating yoga practice. I was like, this helps me with my stress. It clears my mind. It's good physical training and health. And so I was definitely health minded. And I was also in my free time just jumping around to different like spiritual teachers around LA. I was going, like Marianne Williamson would give her talks every week, every Thursday night, I think. So I'd go to like talks like that and different visiting gurus or things. And I would just I was like seeking. So I was like exploring life
And you were like in your early 20s.
I was in my early 20s. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, like, what is it about radio that like piqued your interest or attracted you to it?
Yeah, I think, well, with radio, similar to podcasts, you can like speak to people. There's something unique about radio in that it's just the spoken word. It doesn't have the visuals. So you're not distracted by any visuals, but it's purely the spoken word. And I think when you're when you're effective in radio as a speaker, and you can really reach people, and people are left to their own like imagination, and whatever you're speaking to, people can visualize it or imagine it or see it for themselves. And I really just, for whatever reason, radio spoke to me. I think inherently I have a love for language and speaking and words. And so I think partly that was what resonated for me as well with radio, is like, wow, you can like become, a wordsmith, and you can become effective as a speaker. What's that?
A lot of radio? Did you used to listen to a lot of radio?
Yeah. So in LA, you live in your car. So much of the time you're in your car in LA. So I would listen to radio. I would just flip different radio stations and listen to different talk radio hosts, from politics or people speaking about culture or issues in society or the world, and then also like spiritual teachers on the radio. So, mostly it would be like Christian type platforms where you'd have different, and I'd kind of just flip through those, but nothing was really grabbing me. And then that's actually how I found this Jewish Christian mystic. I remember I was driving in LA. I was driving on Wilshire Boulevard, flicking through radio stations. And then I hear this man speaking. I'm like, wow, it started really resonating with me what he was speaking to. He was speaking about spiritual concepts. He was also speaking about intellectuals and how intellectuals become, the most kind of uneducated people spiritually.
Can you,
they live in concepts.
Draw a picture for us, like for the younger people. Like, was talk radio back then? Because like when I think of radio, I think of like music stations and stuff like that, right? But obviously there's a lot of talk radio.
Yeah.
Was it kind of like how podcasts are right now, where everybody was listening to like talk radios? That's where like conversations, ideas, and
yes. And I think radio, because it's commercial, was far more like presentational. Like we're here on a podcast, or you're listening to podcasts, and it's more organic and conversational. But when more formal radio, it's like, hey, here's a topic, and you hit that topic, and you need to be informing, you need to be educating, you need to be entertaining. I mean, those things probably translate to podcast as well, but it's a little bit more canned, I'd say.
Got it.
It's like because you're but it is it I mean, you would basically listen to these different hosts talk about specific topics, whether their jam is politics or their jam is about culture issues or life, or but it wasn't really, here and there you'd have a radio show that was dedicated to just health, or how podcasts you have all
Yeah.
these different podcasts out there that are dedicated to different niches or topics. Radio it'd be more like, okay, here's a conservative radio talk show host, here's a liberal talk show host for politics, here's someone just talking about society, like culture and
Mm.
societal things, or just entertainment. And then of course, yeah, you have all the music stations as well. But I was drawn toward talk radio. Yeah, the kind of the insemination of ideas,
Yeah.
and and having people kind of riff on what's happening in the world in real time.
I also think that like that art of like spoken language, spoken words, because that's like a totally different thing than like reading something, or like I feel like that in itself is like a form of art, where when you're like that, when you're kind of just having a conversation and you're just
Yeah,
letting your thoughts like freely just flow, sometimes
yeah,
like you actually come up with new ideas just through
yeah,
that practice.
yeah, right. Yeah, you and I get that. It's like as we're speaking, we're also learning, right? As we're
Yeah.
speaking about an idea, we're also discovering it for ourselves in the moment, just like we are right now, probably. It's
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
more we talk about something. And I think that's also what's available to the listener, is that then they're kind of learning as they're listening and putting it into the framework of their own ways of viewing things or thinking about things. But yeah, radio in that sense, I think is educational, can be. That's what I liked about talk radio, is that it has this educational component.
Hmm. So it sounds like that there's, because I think of now, right? There's like a huge boom in like this like self help, personal development world with this podcast and all of, like in all different areas, like health, business, whatever it is,
Yeah.
yoga. Was it, how was it at this time? Because it sounds like you kind of went through this journey that a lot of these young people nowadays go through, like where they feel lost and they're like, I don't know what's you know what I mean? And they
Yeah.
try to like
Yeah.
read all these books and listen to all these podcasts. So it sounds like you kind of went through that whole thing, like
Yeah.
back in those days, through
Yeah.
radio, books. I remember you telling me that you subscribed to this newsletter of this pastor. Um,
Oh
um,
yeah.
I was trying to learn about small groups
The
and
purpose driven church guy. I forget his
yeah.
name. Yeah. Things
So
like
like
that.
these,
I was just kind of looking. Yeah. Um, but yeah, exactly. And I think that, well, it'd be tough. I mean, I feel for the younger generations and people who are like searching online, because there's so much noise out there around self-help, personal development, health. It's like there, all these influencers are like, presenting themselves a certain way. And it's like how to sift through what's real and what's just fabricated, and, personality putting content out, and maybe it's good content, but it's not really built on anything
mhm,
real.
yeah,
Yeah. It's like
yeah,
there's so much out there now. It's just a lot of noise to sift through. How do you get to the credible people?
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I guess back then it was less of that. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably always been like, I know for myself, I would go through to all these different teachers in person, though, mostly. And I was searching, and mostly I was like, no, this isn't it for me. Like I'd
yeah.
go to these different Indian gurus. And by that point in my life, I had been around so much of that growing up. I was like, I wasn't the guru thing, and that like it just nothing was quite matching up for me.
Mhm,
Like it just didn't seem like congruent, or it wasn't passing the sniff test. So I wasn't someone who was just looking to join a club or a
Got it.
group or a guru. Like I was more like seeking, but mostly I was like, no, it's not that. No, not this person. No, not, it was like a lot. And then I would take nuggets from the different teachers here and there, but it was like, it wasn't giving me a real foundation structure to line up to. So that's where I was mostly lost, because my own doing, I wasn't just going to buy into something because I'd walk into a room and there'd be, two or 300 kind of glazed eyed followers of some spiritual teacher up there who's,
Got it. I see
got
what you
the
mean. Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
the rap, the narrative and the charisma. And I'm like,
Yeah.
or like you walk in, they're all chanting and it's like, I don't know. I didn't buy into it all. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. So now
Yeah.
you really wouldn't like if it was right now, you really wouldn't buy into any of it. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
probably a lot
Yeah.
of the stuff that's
Yeah, I
out
look
right
for
now.
real. I look for authenticity. I look for, it. I think we all have a sniff, like test. Like
Hmm.
we can sense when someone's real, but I think if we're too hungry and too, like willing or too whatever vulnerable, and we're just like we'll glom on to anything that seems like if it grabs us emotionally, but I don't necessarily let my emotion be my test for authenticity. It's if that
So
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I think we all kind of have that little, I guess, kind of compass inside us.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
if we allow it to like, you know,
I think so.
work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
think
If we're
so? How
not
did you
too
go from
eager. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, to jump to
Yeah.
conclusions or something?
Yeah.
So how do you go from like that moment of like, you know, you find this new method of meditation till like basically, you know, starting of Baptiste yoga? Like how does
Yeah.
how do you go from here to here?
Yeah. Well, a few things happened for me. Like when I started meditating in this new way, I remember crying. Like I would just sit and get really quiet and just start observing my thoughts. And then all of a sudden, like all this emotion would just start bubbling up, like old, I don't know, it just felt like old energy and emotions that maybe had just been stuffed down over years or something. And I would just start crying for no reason. I couldn't even locate why I was crying. It was like I was just all this when I'd sit and get quiet. Suddenly, it was like my whole like inner world like got activated, and suddenly it's like, hey, I'm experiencing what's actually here internally. And I realized I was like, oh, I had a lot of anger and resentment and things like that. And then part of a big shift for me was this part of this teacher, and more like, and this is like probably more biblical based, as a principle of forgiveness. So I was like, oh, before that, I didn't really, because again, I was in all the Eastern yoga teachings. They don't talk about forgiveness or,
Mm,
lay down your pride and your ego, lay that down and give that up. It's not, you don't really do that kind of work
mhm,
in that yoga world. So I was like, suddenly I was like, wow, I have all this anger. And then I realized it was toward my father. Initially, I just thought it was like, okay, there's all this anger toward my dad. And then I started waking up and saying, oh, there's all this anger toward my mom and my parents. And then, I they lived in San Francisco. And I remember I jumped on a flight and went and showed up at their front door. And I just basically said, sorry. I said, look, I've been judging you. I've been, resenting you. I've been holding a sword over your head. And I just want to say sorry because, I know you have loved me in the best ways that you can. And you've given me a lot in my life and basically provided for me. And so I just went and said sorry and apologized. And what happened there, it was like I don't know, 1,000-pound straight jacket that I had been wearing. It just like dropped off of me. Like it literally
mhm,
dropped off. Suddenly I had like this whole experience of like, wow, freedom. Like I was just
Mm,
free. It's like that, know the truth and the truth will make you free. Well, it was like the
mhm,
truth was I was angry and resentful toward my parents. I was blaming them for how my life was going, being lost and confused. I was like blaming all that on them and kind of punishing them by giving them the cold shoulder and all these games. And when I dropped all that, it was like, whoa, suddenly I had a whole new beginning right there. And then I started, yeah, living more from the truth as I was seeing it, and
mhm,
as it was kind of being revealed to me, truth about myself, things that, like all these blind spots and unconscious ways in my life that were undermining and sabotaging my life and progress in life. So suddenly I was on a new kind of trajectory. But here's my point, or I'll kind of correlate it to yoga. So I was practicing yoga. I was doing a lot of what's called Ashtanga yoga back then, at a place in Santa Monica. And then I was also practicing Iyengar yoga, and I was doing a little bit of Bikram yoga, but mostly I was like doing this Ashtanga every morning, and it's kind of this flow. But here's my point: when I went through that forgiveness process, my parents, suddenly my yoga practice just completely opened up. Like my body literally unlocked, and I had all this kind of new
mm,
flow of energy. And I was like, wow, this is like kind of living from the truth as I was awakening to it. Truth about myself and about life was freeing up my energy, and it was showing up in my yoga practice. And then it also translated in, I was more free just with people in general. So before then, like I was, I don't know if it's shy, I was kind of suppressed, I was like kind of pent up, like bound up. But after that whole experience, I was suddenly able to kind of relate to people in a new way. Like I would just see people, like be able to look at them in the eyes and really see them. And I was just freed up. A lot of my insecurities dropped away. And that
wow.
was when I started getting some interest in maybe teaching yoga practice. But it took me a
Mm.
while. There's more to that story of how I got started. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's definitely get into that.
Yeah.
While
Yeah.
you were telling that whole story, I was like, can you can you kind of give us like an idea of like from the moment you started meditating, and then when when you like had the conversation with your parents and having that whole real like and then like realizing how it affects your yoga practice, like what does that time period look like? Is this in a matter of like weeks or months, years?
Yeah. It was probably both of that. It was probably days of like, where I was suddenly like, again, dropping all this kind of energetic weight, and old emotional weight was just kind of evaporating, leaving my body. Literally, I could feel it. And then it kept progressing like that over the like weeks and months to come, and then definitely for years to come. Um,
Oh, wow.
and and I was, I had this thing. I'll go back a little bit. When I was younger, I was like in my teens, and I remember having a conversation with my parents because there was some talk back then, uh, um, in the news and stuff, that the government, I don't know, were we going to war or something? I'm not sure, but there was some talk about the government could start drafting people into the military. There's a bunch of talk about that in the news at a certain point when I was like a teenager, like 17, 18 years old. And I remember my dad and mom talked to me, and they're like, you should start teaching. If you were to start teaching yoga, and then you become like, um, it's like your religion. You could get out of the draft by, like by claiming, you're a yoga teacher and a minister of yoga and all this. And I'm like, I remember looking at my dad and going, Dad, I'm like, no way, never, ever, ever will I ever teach yoga. Not on God's green earth will I ever teach yoga. That's not going to happen. So I'd much rather get drafted. I'd much rather join the military. whatever it takes, but I ain't teaching yoga. so, so that was pretty hardwired into me. So I enjoyed in fast forward back to LA in my early 20s, I enjoyed the practice of yoga, but I really didn't want that as a career or something, that I did. I just really didn't want to do that. But I was a private trainer it was called the Beverly Hills Health Club. It was right on Robertson and Melrose, right near Melrose there, or Santa Monica Boulevard, and
You were hired
Robertson
as
right
a
there. A
trainer?
private trainer. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was training people just through regular fitness, weights and cardio and just basic kind of general fitness. And I got certifications for, I forget what they are, AFA and those different personal training kind of institutions. So I was a certified trainer. I was training clients, but here's what happened. So I would train these clients, and I had several celebrity, well-known kind of celebrity clients and things like that. But what I would do is I would take them through their physical workout. And at the end of every workout, for the last 5 or 10 minutes of the workout, I would take them through just some yoga moves. And then what would happen is my clients started coming to me saying, hey, that whatever it is we're doing at the end there, you're calling it yoga. Because again, people didn't really know yoga back then. It wasn't a thing, right? So they're like, that what we're doing at the very end there, could we do more of that? That just feels so good. And it leaves me, and I would take them through a little visualization, breathing exercises and meditation at the very end. And they were like, can we do more of that? That's I feel so good when I do that. So I was like, I don't want to get it. It was part of me didn't want to go there, but I would start doing more just yoga set.
What
The sessions were made up of more yoga practice with several of my clients. Yeah.
is there a particular reason why you decided to add that at the end of your sessions?
It was purely intuitive because we would get done working out and then we would go over into a corner in the gym and maybe do it instead of doing a few stretches. I would take them through a pretty rapid fire series of yoga poses again, because I was practicing, but intuitively I wanted to leave my clients feeling whole and complete at the end. And I was like, well, you've got to include this kind of these physical yoga poses that kind of take your body through its full range of motion and releases your joints and muscles and connective tissue, and then bring in some mind, some breathing exercises and some meditation, just leave them calm and chilled. And so it just was for me intuitively, it felt like a complete workout to add that aspect to it. So for me, it was more just intuitive. It was I like lifting some weights and doing some of the workout stuff myself, but I always would lean back into yoga, the yoga practice and breathing practices. And I was meditating myself. So every, 2-3 times a day, every day. And so it felt just intuitively the way to leave my clients feeling really good.
And then, so you kind of accidentally started teaching yoga. that
yeah,
way.
it kind of started there. And then there was this place, it was called Voight Fitness and Dance Center in Hollywood. And it was the mecca for fitness, group fitness in LA. And basically it was I think they had 11 different classrooms and it was just group classes. And I wanted to move into teaching group fitness. And back then it was I don't know, you do step classes or, different, I forget what they're called now, but you do weights and that step thing, and you do some aerobic stuff, aerobic moves. And I wanted to move into group fitness. So and Voight, to work there was almost impossible. You had to be kind of a famous fitness, group fitness trainer, teacher. But I heard they were holding an audition for group fitness teachers. So I showed up to the audition. There were 200 people there auditioning. I was like, oh man. And I didn't have much experience, but basically I went up and, you go through this audition. Each teacher, you have a chance to go up, and the owners of the facility there were like basically, judging, evaluating you if you would make the mark to join their schedule. So I did my little audition presentation, led some little group class for like, I don't know what it was, 5 minutes or something. And then they were like, you didn't make the mark on that. But like, we heard, I guess one of the other trainers there was like, we know of your family. Like, we've heard of your family background. Like, you've got this vast yoga background. And, we know of your family from, the physical old days and physical health. My dad was like an early Mr. America and started the Mr. America contest, stuff like that. And so they knew of my dad and stuff like that. And basically they said, look, we would love you to teach yoga here. They said, we've tried having different yoga teachers, different yoga classes, and they haven't worked for our members. Like, and they said, but the way, you're so physical and athletic, maybe, if we'd love to, try you out teaching some yoga classes. And they're like, we don't really know about yoga, but we know there's something to it, but we haven't been able to find a teacher here for years. We've been trying that our clients would like. So I said, oh boy, here I go. Do I want to like get into teaching yoga? It's like, they're not hiring me for what I wanted to get hired for, but I basically said, okay, I'll try it. Let's do a class. I'll start teaching a class every Saturday morning. So the first class, like, I showed up, and I think there were like 20 people in the classroom. And I remember I taught the class and gave it my best. And then I remember standing by the door at the end of class, and people are leaving, and I was like apologizing. I was like, thank you. But really I was saying, sorry. Like, I felt bad. Like I just like failed. But I was saying, thank you for coming. But I was really feeling more like I'm saying apologizing at the same time. But I remember walking out of that classroom, and the
Do you think
owners were
every
there.
teacher feels
What's
like
that?
that? Do you think every teacher feels like that, kind of in the beginning days?
I think for sure a lot of new teachers that are just starting out in their first teaching, they probably often are feeling like they aren't doing a great job. And they can definitely go into beating
Like they
themselves
feel
up, being hard
almost
on
apologetic.
themselves. There's always the class you're going to teach, and then there's the class you teach, and then there's the class you should have taught. And I think newer teachers lean a lot into the class they should have taught. Um, and I think, it probably depends on the level of training and development that they've been given as well, to have the confidence and the tools and the skills and the method to teach effectively helps a lot as for new teachers. But yeah, that's a common thing, and it's something I certainly went through. Oh yeah,
Mm.
for years I would beat myself up after every class. Didn't matter how many people would love it and like say, "Oh, that was so amazing." It was like the only lens I had, and my filter was, I sucked, I blew it, and the more obvious things, if I'd mess up my words in the class or something, like, I just would focus on that,
Yeah.
which isn't a bad thing though, because it also, if it's like Michael Jordan would watch all his games, after the game, he would watch his game tapes, not for what he did right. He would always look for what he was missing, like what was
Hmm.
missing in his technique or in his game. So, but he wasn't judging himself. He was able to watch and see what was missed. So I think as I matured more and started making myself bad or wrong, or like I'm no good, like I'm a failure, I took all that out. And to this day, when I'm leading something, I'm still looking, well, what's missing, or how could I improve what my delivery or technique of teaching.
So you obviously, like, if you didn't take that job, right? Because you're like, oh, because I actually feel like that is kind of a pivotal moment, because a lot of I see a lot of people nowadays. Let's say they're in your situation, right? Okay, here we're offering your job as to teach yoga, which is now something I want to do. It's not my calling. It's not my
Good for
passion.
you.
Like
It's good to know
this is
that.
how
Yeah. Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
how they might look at it, right? And then, but then I do want to be a trainer, which is like my true passion. Let's say is my calling. At this point, I think a lot of people nowadays will not take that yoga job and just hold out for, like, do you know what I mean? Which would actually be, in my experience, is a mistake, because a lot of times you don't know what you're passionate about. I feel like you just you have to kind of do it first
You have to
to
put
because
yourself out there and
yeah,
discover, yeah, like in like I think
because at them
if you have some inclination to try, like, oh, I'd like to do that, but then if it's fear that's stopping you, or the fear of maybe being judged, or the fear of yeah, looking foolish, or all those things come up, and if that's what's stopping you from following kind of your, oh yeah, I'm interested in that, trying that, you'll never discover was that something you wanted to do. And I think whether it's
mm,
teaching yoga or anything you want to do in life, starting a
or
podcast,
like here in this
yeah,
case, I feel like, because you didn't want to teach yoga, so I almost feel like when that opportunity presented itself, and even though it's not something like, for you, it's not like your dream scenario, just like seeing what's there and trying it out, because ultimately led you to teaching yoga, right?
yeah,
Because you didn't think you were gonna actually enjoy it, maybe.
yeah. Yeah, I probably didn't enjoy. It's interesting. I enjoy it when I'm in the moment while I'm doing it, and then but the leading up to it, and the anticipation, and then the post teaching,
Oh wow!
after the fact, that would be difficult for me. It would kind of zap the joy out of it often. Yeah, and that's not
But do you
everybody.
think?
That's
Don't you
just
think?
me. Yeah,
But don't you think? I actually, because I feel the exact, because as you're saying that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I feel, right? Like leading up to the moment where I have to do my Sunday service or training or workshop or whatever it is. I'm like, it's like so so stressful, and I don't want to do it. But then once it starts and I'm in the moment,
yeah,
like, because I feel exactly like that,
yeah.
and then it almost kind of reminds me of like why I do it.
Hmm. Why do you
Like
do
right
it?
before, yeah.
Why do you do it? Like, what keeps
No,
bringing you back?
like it's that moment, because I
Yeah,
feel like leading up to, let's say, me teaching, I'm like kind of stressed out. I'm like, I don't want to do this. And then once I start talking and I see, I don't know, the energy shifts, and then I'm
yeah,
like, oh, this is
yeah,
why I do it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then put that into the shoes of a beginner, a new person to anything. Like, and if that's just mostly what they're living in, and is living in their head about it, and the anticipation and the stress of being properly prepared or doing it right, or all that, and then you don't actually cross the line and go and, yeah, teach a class or get on a podcast, or things that you want to do and you're curious about, because the harder part often is leading up to it, and then the aftermath, just internal aftermath,
Yeah,
like what you have to deal with in yourself. Or often after the fact, yeah, you feel pretty good because, like, wow, that went pretty great,
yeah.
and I could improve on things. But yeah, I think
And
people
it's like
get
every time.
stopped before they get started, but you have
Yeah,
to get started to discover, is this for me anyways, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I also wanted to kind of touch on, like, um before, you were talking about how this meditation practice changed how you practice yoga, right? Like it changed,
Yeah.
and I can like totally kind of, like, if I've never done yoga before, I probably be like, what do you mean? Like I have no idea what you mean. But I remember, like, when I was at the second time I went to the level one,
Yeah.
I was in this pose, which I was really, I was in the tree pose, which I was really struggling. I kept falling like every like every second or something like that. And then I remember one of the teachers came up and then like told me to like focus on my gaze and my breath. And then like
Mm-hmm.
after a few seconds, and then I was able to balance like without like it's almost like something happened to my body.
Mm-hmm.
Where like
Yeah.
now my body was like, all right, it almost became easy. Something that seemed impossible like just a few seconds ago
Yeah.
almost seemed easy, like
Yeah.
just because of my mental state shifted.
Yeah.
So I can totally see what you mean by like how your meditation like changed your yoga practice. Do
Yeah.
you think that has anything to do with uh like why you wanted to teach yoga, and maybe like you saw a different side of yoga that you didn't see before or something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for me, two things. So, yeah, like what we're talking about when you're actually teaching and like so I was showing up teaching these classes, people were loving it. Like they were loving it and the classes were building. So I went from teaching one class a week to then like 3 or 4 classes a week. And then every class was selling out. So we had to add more classes. And pretty soon, I think I was up to like 20, 22 group classes a week, teaching 2, 3 times a day kind of thing. And it kept pulling me in. So I was also working in radio. That was like my regular job. And then in the early mornings and evenings, I was teaching classes, and these classes kept growing. And it was like and it was going against the grain of what I wanted, because I really wanted to go into more like radio, and journalism was
Mm-hmm.
like my jam. And then but this kept pulling me, this yoga thing. And it was just people, you know what it was? It was really like just the experience people were left in at the end of every class. And it was like, it was a very rewarding feeling. But even then, even as it became really popular, and I don't know, it's, thousands of people a month coming to my classes at one point. And I remember I was like, I don't want to, this isn't like, I don't want to be, firstly, I had a lot of associations from my childhood about yoga teachers and gurus. And I was like, I don't want to be anybody's guru. I don't want to be, I didn't like being put up on a pedestal. I just didn't like it. It went against the grain of like
Wait,
my childhood. Yeah.
do
Yeah.
you think that's the reason why you didn't want to teach yoga from the begin in the to begin with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not that you didn't want to teach yoga, you didn't want to be a guru or something like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. That was always there for me. It was,
Yeah.
two things. It was like I was teased a lot growing up in San Francisco because my family was about yoga and spiritual Eastern teachings and health food. And it wasn't popular. It wasn't common then. So we were like the weird people, kids would always tease me, like call me Hare Krishna. And I was a weird kid and different kid. And so I think from my childhood, I had a lot of negative associations about yoga and I didn't want to, I wanted to be normal. And
You didn't know
so,
how hip it
I
was
didn't
gonna
want to
be.
be, yeah, I didn't want to be some guru or like that didn't interest me. And that was when I like started coining it like power yoga. And
Mm,
I played around with different names originally. And I
got
was
it.
like, I remember I called it fast track yoga or, athletes yoga or different things. And then I landed on power yoga and I went with that. And basically, I was like all about, okay, I'm going to take yoga practice and strip it down of all the like mystical and all the new agey fluff and puff and make it accessible to every kind of person, like, without all the weirdness. And
Mm,
look, no offense to anyone who's into all that, but
mm,
that wasn't what I want to do. And it partly though, that was out of my childhood. I'm like, okay, I could present yoga in a way that is just the physical practice, the deep breathing, the concentration aspects of it. It's good mind body fitness, but without all the trappings. that can
Mm-hmm.
often come, the Hinduism and the different kind of yoga stuff. So that became my whole thrust. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to create yoga for the everyday person from any walk of life. They don't have to, be kind of,
Yeah.
into like a new ager. It was like
Yeah.
it was like, no, my whole jam is like anti new age, anti guru,
Mm.
and I took a lot of heat back then from the traditional yoga establishment. Because like, who are you? I remember like there was some article in LA Times about me and some other, it was about my power yoga. And then they were interviewing other yoga experts. And I remember these yoga people were just hitting me hard. Like they're saying, oh, the yogis are turning over in their graves right now with Baron Baptiste doing his power yoga, and I was taking
Mm-hmm.
a lot of heat from the traditional yoga people,
Mm-hmm.
but I was like, okay, I don't care. I'm not going to do that's not like
Mm-hmm.
so. And I wasn't really teaching traditional yoga. I really was just teaching the poses and breathing and concentration and focus and a meditative aspect. But I was also at that point now, I was like into Christian mysticism. So I was in myself, like my whole orientation was coming more from a like just like biblical standpoint, not
Mm-hmm.
yoga new age. I was actually anti new age. I took
Mm-hmm.
that on like for a while, kind of in a black and white kind of way. So my yoga was like, it was interesting to people because they're like, wow, this guy is bringing in good, like, uh, kind of concepts, spiritual concepts, and you know personal growth kind of philosophy, but it wasn't new agey, it wasn't eastern, it was more just my version of like life
Yeah.
philosophy that worked for me. And then yoga, the physical yoga poses done with deep breathing and drishti, the gaze and the concentration.
And did you come up with Journey into Power like from the beginning, or is that something that's evolved over time? Over or how did you come up with that sequence?
Yeah, so yeah, it's a good question. So during this time, what happened was I was working in radio. That was like my regular day job. I was teaching yoga in the evenings and mornings, and then I was the radio. I was working full time at this radio network in LA, and they were moving their headquarters from LA from Culver City to Oregon, somewhere up in Oregon, and they offered me a position to move up to Oregon, and I'm like, no, I'm going to stay in LA, so I didn't accept that job. So suddenly I lost that job, and then in that same time, an opportunity opened up for me to go to Paris and teach yoga in Paris, and I was like for a year. So I was like, it was like these big. The guy's name was Louis Malle. His wife was Candice Bergen. She was like a big TV actress. Louis Malle was a big filmmaker back then, and a French filmmaker. And so they lived between Beverly Hills and Paris. They wanted yoga practice in Paris, so they had been clients of mine. So they invited me to live in Paris and teach yoga, and they wanted that just for themselves to have these classes. And there's this dance center in Paris, and it's called the Center of Dance, Centre de Danse, and it was a lot of just bunch of classrooms. So anyway, they kind of set me up. I moved to Paris, and what I started doing while I was in Paris, I would teach a class every morning, every evening, maybe in the afternoon. But I would go to cafes there and just journal. I'd read and journal. And I remember drafting out like, what is this ideal sequence? So I would like draft it out on paper, like the blueprint, like what's the flow, the sequence, like here that's going to be like, like a win, like well-rounded, every part of the body, mind, like a well-rounded physical power yoga practice. So I would like draft it out, And then I would go and teach that. And so I was like, I would draft it out in the cafes and then I would go teach it. And I kept refining it over about a period of a year like that. And then I pretty much came up with Journey to Power by the end of that year. And then I moved back to LA and started teaching in LA. And I was teaching that sequence and it was just hitting a nerve with people. People loved it. And it was just hitting a nerve. And so it was kind of like, yeah, I was in this laboratory in Paris for a year, kind of work
And
sorting it out, developing it.
and the sequence now is the same sequence as like that one you developed
Yeah,
back then, or has it
pretty
changed?
much. No, pretty
Oh wow.
much. Yeah, I'd say 90% of it is that original. Like, you know, I I know like there are people that studied with me in LA back in the like 25 years ago, and if they'd come to a class like let's say before the pandemic when I was teaching more, people would come to class and they're like, "Wow, you're still teaching the same practice. You've just grown up." Like, yeah, and they're like, "Wow, it still works, man, as good as ever." So, yeah, it evolved, and the delivery and the transitions and the nuance in the practice has been refined for sure. But no, the skeleton same. Yeah.
what do you think it's what do you think it is about that sequence that, like, is it, I feel like it's like kind of hard.
Mm-hmm.
like like what do you think it is about that sequence that makes like that special, that's been around for so long and people still like practice it every day and
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, to your point, it's hard, right? And it's designed like that. But I think there's something about doing hard things. I was where maybe it's Huberman or someone was recently talking about studies that show that it's not about just doing hard things, but it's doing hard things that you don't want to do. And I
mm-hmm.
think often like the Journey into Power sequence itself, it presents a challenge. It's stressful, but they're talking about the results that come with doing hard things and hard things that you don't want to do. But that's where the magic is. That's where the growth is. That's where the results are.
Yeah,
That's where the kind of revelation of
yeah,
like the stuff of real growth and development. You see it, and you see it in a tangible, real way
yeah,
in your body, how you stand, how you walk, how you feel, your clarity of mind. And I think the Journey into Power sequence just has that right combination of
yeah.
it's dynamic,
And you've played around with it
ecstatic.
for a
Yeah.
year to, like, it's for me,
Yeah.
like when I think of Journey into Power, it's like a work of art, because
Yeah.
compared to like other sequences, like other yoga classes I've done, it's like almost like I feel like other classes, just when I feel like it's gonna, okay, this is too hard, let me out, like they'll let me out.
Yeah.
Like I feel like the Journey into Power sequence just like holds it a little bit longer until I until you're like, and they kind of, you kind of do it right from the beginning with the sun salutation, like where like it tells you right away from the beginning, like this is how it's gonna go.
You're in it. Yeah. You're in it.
Yeah.
And there's no
And
way out.
throughout the whole, yeah, exactly, throughout the whole thing
Yeah.
is like whatever
Mm-hmm.
you think you got, I'm gonna push it just a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah. And sometimes
mentality.
you go through that when you get on the mat like that. It's like initially there's that kind of the torture and it's like, like this is like hard and resist. You're coming up against your own resistance. But at a certain point in that flow, it's like whatever, 30 minutes, 15 minutes in or 30 minutes, something starts shifting. Like your energy starts
Mm-mm.
shifting. The resistance starts dissolving. Suddenly you get into some flow, and by the end you start coming out of your head. I think that's a big one for they walk into the practice like in their heads. Journey into Power gets you grounded in your body, like it brings you
Mm-mm.
down like out of all that head stuff. And I think just thinking and stress, the stresses of life, worries, all that, suddenly it's like a vacation from all that. Like you come in
Mm-mm.
locked in your head. And then, yeah, like to your point, then maybe you feel like, okay, I'm locked into this practice, I'm trapped here, and the way out is through, and you're going through the practice. But then on the other end of it, when you finally get to that shavasana, final relaxation, it's like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
like I just accomplished something, and I just feel more free, more open, more present, more at ease. Not always, but often, and even just by degree, you get some relief, some
Yeah.
kind of shift from out of like, yeah, suffering. It's like a new beginning, a reset of sorts. But it's partly because it is, I think, the challenge of
And
it.
I feel like that's the for me, like for me to get into that state, like you said, because you're right? Like in some classes, I mean, I'm kind of still a beginner, but in some classes, I feel like I have that moment in the middle of the class where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna ride this through. But then some classes like that never comes, and it's like just hard all the it's just like
Yeah,
hell
yeah,
all the way through. And for me, that a lot of that has to do with the teacher. I feel like
yeah, yeah,
some teachers can get me
yeah,
to that state,
yeah,
and to me
yeah,
that's a huge part of like the teachers that I love versus not as much.
yeah, yeah, right, yeah. No, a good teacher kind of brings you into, um, well, that's why we call it journey into power. So a good teacher kind of guides you through the poses, through the breath, through the practices, and they kind of bring you to through that journey into, a state of power. So, and even if a class is hard all the way throughout, when you walk out of that class, out of that building, and you walk out back into your life, you're like, whoa, I just feel better. The class never felt better. It never
Mm-hmm.
got to feeling that good in class
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. But then when you go out into back into your regular life, you're like, whoa, I feel like a little more clear, a little like
Mm-hmm.
taller, a little stronger, a little more at ease, less
Yeah.
like in my head and thinking. Yeah.
So kind of like I want to try to wrap it up. My final question to you, like open-ended question. So when I think of Baptiste, I think of like disrupting the drift, right? Like
Yeah.
we kind of
Like my
live our
podcast.
life. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The
Yeah.
podcast, like even like level one, everything
Yeah.
about Baptiste, I feel like is all about instead of just drifting along, like
Disruption of
yeah,
status quo.
disrupting.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, do you think that's related to like back, like how when you really started meditating? Um, is that still related, like, or how did that evolve over time? Like, when did you realize that okay, the way out is to to is through, or like that whole concept of like doing the work and disrupting the drift and that power
Yeah.
yoga, like
Yeah. No, it's really good. So, for sure, meditation. So, when I first started meditating, so again, when I first started meditating as a kid and in the yoga meditations, it was more like this kind of comforting kind of bubble. There was nothing really disruptive about it. I mean, it's always hard to just sit, but it was kind of like this velvety, cushiony, comfortable kind of thing. When I started this new meditation of really getting present to my body and observing my thoughts, and that was tough. But it was disruptive. It disrupted my normal ways of like just living in my head, interacting with my thoughts all day long, just, from the moment I wake up. So when I started meditating, I'd wake up and my head was busy. I've already got this mental commentary going in my head. The voice in my head is active and doubts and something's wrong and problems. But I sit and meditate. I still do to this day. And to sit and meditate and get present, I like stop, drop into my body, get present. And it's like I fall awake to my environment. I fall awake to just the present moment, and to a presence like greater than myself. And I was like, well, this is a disruption. So I could just drift along, wake up, be in my thoughts, be in my head, be in all that stress mess, but I could actually sit and get quiet, and get still. and it disrupts that drift, and it awakens me to a different kind of path. And then I'm a different human being in my day, because I'm coming from a different place, a different point of view after having meditated and disrupted that just drift of thoughts, and worries and the voice in my head, and yada yada. So it definitely, I think it was meditation probably was at the source of getting, oh, I can disrupt the patterns in my day. Taking a walk, if you're really stressed, getting out and taking a walk, that can kind of disrupt a pattern if you're, or getting on a yoga mat, or, having a good conversation with a friend where you can really kind of share freely and authentically. Okay, those kind of things are disruptive to just that kind of the default pattern of thinking and operating and moving through your day and life. So, but I think for me, it was that original meditation. Again, coming to those like living biblical principles became disruptive to that kind of lost Baron that was living. It was like, no, I can actually put in live these principles that a great teacher like Jesus taught. And it's like, that's disruptive, and getting really quiet and is disruptive to that general just drifting along in life. Getting on the yoga mat and moving, breathing, and going through a pretty challenging, rigorous yoga practice is disruptive, right? And like, you're talking about level 1, you come into that for a week, 5-6 days of like daily practice and daily meditation, and do some kind of inquiry work. It's suddenly that it's just like putting the usual life on ice, putting it on a shelf, giving yourself, whether it's 10 minutes or 6 days, it's like you take that time to like get present to, well, what's most important to me, and get clear for yourself on what your life is about, and who you want to be in your life, who you want to become, what's my purpose, things like that. I think we have to disrupt the status quo to kind of get present to what's more important or most important to ourselves. Yeah.
And what would you say, what's going forward, right? Because I know that you've always had this like interest in radio. Now you've been consistently doing your podcast for a long time now.
For a year,
what's in the
my podcast and YouTube, for about a year and 2 months or so. Yeah.
Disrupt the Drift, and it's also on audio,
drift,
right? Audio podcast as well.
Yeah, it's on all the audio platforms, and then also on YouTube. Yeah.
So what's kind of like next chapter for you, Baron? Like, is it to continue to spread this message of disrupting the drift? Like, are you trying to go more into podcasts and like content?
Yeah, good question. I was always kind of threatening myself over the last, I want to say 10 years or so, to like kind of stop teaching yoga and stop, doing all the trainings and programs. Part of me loves it, but I was also like, I just kept threatening myself. And I would tell others, like, this may be the last one. This is maybe the last year. Like that I want to say for the last 8 or 10 years, that was really like present for me. So I think that's where the pandemic was like a perfect forced quit. I mean, the pandemic, it was, I think, awful for the world and for people in general. It wasn't a positive thing, but I think there's a lot of positives that have come out of that for a lot of people, including myself, where I was like, wow, got to force quit, got to like, step back, and like, I was like, wow, I didn't know how I was going to exit, and it's not like exit, like quit, but just like step back, take a bigger look. And what I do know is I love working with people. And I have a lot of experience in running, an organization and I've had different businesses over the years. And so I love working with entrepreneurs and leaders and just people from all walks of life. and it doesn't have to be in yoga. I still want to do some yoga stuff with yoga because I think it's so valuable, and meditation. But I think my leaning now is just like, how can you, like really disrupt just drifting along in your life, and really get present to, who can you be, who do you want to be, what's most important. I think it's a time in the world, there's so much kind of crisis and uncertainty and fear and anxiety and depression. And I think though it really, the body is important, physical health, fitness, physical well-being, but I don't think the mind body are separate. So I think, I enjoy, it's almost like coming full circle for me back to my early LA days when I wanted to be in radio, and coming back to like, well, yeah, a message that, just putting out content that gives people the ability to do some bigger thinking, some bigger looking in their life at
Mm.
in themselves, but also just like all the happenings in the world, culturally, in society, even politically, just like
Yeah.
taking a bigger look at, and if I can have
And I've
some kind of
always,
influence or impact in making someone's life better or easier, yeah, that inspires me.
yeah. So I think it's kind of like we've had discussions about this, and that's how I always looked at like Baptiste yoga. I never looked at Baptiste yoga as like y- yoga, but it's more like kind of personal development, like self discovery, and a lot of other stuff. And
Yeah,
yoga was just part of it, right?
yeah,
And it seems like you're kind of going more in that direction, like not just in yoga, but you know,
yeah,
just in our personal journey,
yeah,
personal
yeah,
development.
yeah, exactly. Personal journey in life, and how can you be the best version of yourself, and elevating your life, and living a life that is fulfilling. Yeah, yeah,
I love that, and I really hope that with podcasts, like we bring back that art of conversation, the art of like spoken
yeah,
words, like you said, because I think there's
yeah. Well, you're
beauty in
doing
that.
it. You're doing it. So am I. So I think
Yeah,
it's awesome. Yeah,
we're both doing
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So where would you want to send people to if they want to learn more about momentum, disrupt the drift,
Yeah, I
Baptiste
have a
yoga?
monthly subscription called Momentum Nation. You can go, just if you put in Baron Baptiste Momentum online, and that's a monthly subscription. It's got meditations, yoga practices, and just content like what we're talking about here, just about how to elevate your life, looking at principles and distinctions to live an elevated life, your best life. There's that, and then I'm on YouTube at, Disrupt the Drift on YouTube, twice, 3 times a week. I'm dropping videos, and then also my podcast Disrupt the Drift is on all the audio platforms. Yeah,
And are you still doing digital level ones, digital programs?
yeah, yeah. So from time to time, a few times a year, 2 or 3 times a year, doing an online level one. That's an awesome program. We just finished one a month or
Yeah,
so ago, and people love it. Yeah, we have people from
yeah,
all over the world on those. They're pretty amazing how you can digitally do a really powerful program and training, and people, yeah, if they go to baronbaptiste.com, they can find out more about that. I'm also doing this year in Iceland, an in-person level one in Iceland. It's almost sold out, almost full, but that's going to be phenomenal to be in Iceland and do level
that's awesome.
one, tons of yoga
I
practice,
remember we met
meditation, and yeah,
some of the people from Iceland when we were at Global Summit uh,
yeah,
with
yeah,
Inga, and yeah,
amazing
that was
community there in
yeah,
Iceland.
they're
Yeah,
awesome.
phenomenal. Yeah,
Yeah.
group
And
community
just the
that,
one thing about
yeah,
Baptist that I think is so special is the community. It's like
yeah,
everybody. It's like one. It's really like a one big family where you
yeah,
know
yeah, good
everybody
people.
knows each other.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah,
I would just tell all the listeners, like if you haven't done yoga before, or even if you have done yoga but haven't had like this transform, because like for me level one was transformational, and it's the thing that got me to start yoga. And I think if you
Yeah.
just go to a Baptiste yoga for a month, like 30 days, like
Yeah.
consistently, or go to like
Yeah.
level 1,
Yeah.
like it'll change your life. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I can attest
Awesome,
to
man.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Baron,
Yeah.
for coming on. I'll put all the links in the bottom. And
Yeah.
thank you, everyone, for listening. And have a good
Thank
one.
you. Stay blessed.
Cheers.